Hi all, this is the badging video for the Fine Woodworking Hand Tools. In the wood shop there are all kinds of woodworking tools. These are the more traditional ones that just use a sharp blade that you operate by hand to work the tool. They're a little more delicate, they're pretty expensive, and so they're kept in a separate cabinet to keep them clean and also to establish that you do need to think a little bit harder about using them before you just kind of go and start using them on wood, versus some of the other hand tools, chisels, whatnot we have on the wall, where you can just kind of start cutting with a saw or hitting the glue off with a chisel, because they're not that expensive and we aren't sort of holding them in such high regard. But in here we have some really great tools, and the idea with these tools is, in general, they do take a little more skill and work to use. So if you want to make a birdhouse, for example, you could make that probably in half an hour with power tools. You take some wood, you cut it down to size, chop, glue, screw it together. But using traditional methods, that'll take a lot longer. Trying to mill that wood by hand, using jointer, planes and cutting out the joints so that it all fits together nicely. It takes more time, but it can be very satisfying and rewarding and beautiful. And so that's why oftentimes people will use the traditional woodworking tools. There's also a place in more modern woodworking for using hand tools, because sometimes it's just the more efficient, better tool to get a really beautiful finish. Sanding, for example, is taking little grits of sand and sort of scraping away at the wood until it looks smooth, versus a really sharp blade actually just makes a super smooth finish if it's really sharp and well used. So sometimes this can be the better tool to get the job done. So we're going to go over some of the basics of these tools so that when you start using them, you have just a higher degree of comfort. So some of the basics are, first of all, the tools are very sharp, so you need to be very cognizant of that and not run your finger over a blade or something, because they will very easily cut you. The idea is we try to keep them as sharp as possible. That's why a prerequisite of using these tools is being badged on the Tormak, which is the sharpening wheel. Because these tools don't stay sharp for very long, so you can't just use them and expect them to be sharp. You need to know how to be able to sharpen them yourself. We try not to put the blades down on anything metal. They should really only touch wood. So here they're laying on wood, but you wouldn't lay this down on this metal cabinet. You don't want them to touch any nails or even really glue. Glue is actually very hard, so really you just want these to be used on wood. So that's the idea. No scraping glue off, no paint, stuff like that. Just wood, and you don't even lay them down on anything else. You also want to keep them from getting rusty, so something you can do to keep them from getting rusty and to make them operate really nicely is to use paste wax, which you have in a yellow container, and you just buff that on, and that keeps it from getting rusty and keeps it moving really smoothly and glides right over the wood, which is really nice. They're also pretty expensive and take a long time to fix. If you put a nick in a blade, it'll take a long time to repair that, and so, or potentially won't be reparable. And so that's why you just need to be very thoughtful about when you're using these and how you're using them. So that's sort of the mindset. So in terms of going through the tools, we'll just maybe start from the left and go to the right. So all the way over in here, we have saws. And this saw is called the crosscut carcass saw. So they just have these little clasps, so I can pull this down and show you more easily. And this is a back saw. It has this spine along the back to keep it really stiff and straight, versus some other saws, like this, that don't have a back, so it can be more wavy. And carcass is just sort of like referring to the body of a cabinet or a piece of wood. It sounds a little gruesome. Crosscut means that this blade is optimized to cut across the grain. So if this was your piece of wood with a tree grain lines running this way, you'd be used to cut across it, versus ripping is with the grain. That doesn't mean this can't rip, but the tooth pattern is optimized for cross-cutting. We have all the manuals for these tools right here. So you can learn more about the tooth angles and how everything is optimized for a certain purpose. but this is generally for cross-cutting. And this is the dovetail blade, so it's specifically made for cutting dovetails. Dovetails, they look, like little wedges or dovetails. It's a traditional joinery of putting wood together, so that often without even needing to use glue, the pieces just naturally clamp each other into place. So it takes time and practice to make, but using this particular blade can be a good one to get those nice angles. As long as we're talking about that, I'll point out these little marking tools. These help you establish the angles for dovetails. So as an example, here are two pieces of wood, and a dovetail could potentially join them like that. And you would use this just to mark your lines right on your piece of wood at a certain angle. You can also, in that, use a marking knife, which lives right here. And this is like a chisel, sort of. So it's sharp on one side, that blade goes right to an edge, and you put that flat edge against what you're marking with, and the blade scribes a line right in the wood. Versus a pen has sort of an angle tip on both sides, which makes it really hard to get right up against an edge. So this lets you get right up against an edge and make a sharp line. This also serves the purpose of cutting some of the fibers right on the surface. So when you put your blade there, it doesn't have any tear out. The fibers don't come up. This helps sort of cut those surfaces. So even this is a sharp tool which you need to keep sharp to make it work well. That there. Something else to note with these saws is these are all push saws. So traditionally in sort of Western culture, Western woodworking, the saws are push saws, which means they cut when you push. So as I'm pushing, that's what's engaging, and pulling doesn't do anything. So it's cutting when you're pushing. That's important for using it, obviously, but it'll also come up later when we look at other kinds of saws. Here we have an awl. An awl is just a sharp point. It can be made for just using marking points in pieces of wood, or where you want to start a drill to drill a hole. This just helps start the bit in the right place. We covered the marking knife already. It looks like the dovetail guide actually is here. This is a protractor. It's for marking angles. So you can set your angle on here to wherever you want, lock it down, and then mark right along the edge. Down here we have marking gauges. So marking gauges have a pin on them, and these are in general for marking with the grain of a piece of wood. So when you're doing something where, let's just take this piece of wood as an example, you would set the depth by loosening this screw and then sliding to the appropriate depth. That pin is lined up where you want it. Tighten it, and then you would go, in this case, with the grain. And it leaves sort of a scratch in the grain so that you can find where your mark is. This one has two pins on it, so you can set up mortises, which for mortise and tenon joints. So here you can slide them to adjust to your preferred position for the dimensions of your mortise. Tighten it up, and then when you go like that, it'll mark both of the positions. A mortise and tenon joint is when you have two pieces of wood that are fit together somehow, because this one is turned into a tenon, meaning a reduced piece of wood with a reduced shoulder radius, and then a hole is the mortise, what it goes into. So mortise and tenons are a traditional wood joining technique, in addition to dovetails and finger joints and other things like that. On the flip side, it has a single point, if you just want to do one point. These are wheeled marking gauges, so similar, but they just have a spinning wheel at the end. And so they can also leave a nice mark when, in general, again, going with the grain. It's not a super hard rule. With these wheeled marking gauges, you can go across the grain as well. But then the other tool that is very similar but a little different is this, which is a cutting gauge. So here you can see, if it'll focus, there's a blade on there instead of just a pin. It has a single-edged bevel on it. So it's flat on that side and then beveled on the other like a chisel. And what that means is when you mark something, it leaves a very straight edge, and in general this is going for across the grain. So if you went across the grain with a pin, like on the marking gauge, it would scratch it up and tear out the fibers. But here with that knife blade, it'll cut nicely across the fibers so that you can cut right to that line. It'll make a nice clean cut, which will help, when you're cutting a dovetail or a joint of some kind, you cut right to that line and it's really crisp. You can set your chisel in it and you don't have tear out. So that's what that's for, and the wheeled marking gauge also does sort of a similar job in that respect. Then maybe let's start up here. So these are chisels on the left side. Chisels are some of the most traditional kinds of woodworking tool, and it's just a blade with a sharp edge on one side. So versus some kinds of like a Western kitchen knife is sharp on both sides, a chisel, like a Japanese knife, is sharp only on one side. So the back is just kept flat, and then this is kept at an angle. And on most of these, they should have an angle actually engraved in them, so when you're sharpening them on the Tormek, you know what angle to sharpen them at. This one I can see actually has a nick right in the blade. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. Right there. And so that is from someone hitting a nail or something, and now someone has to put in a lot of work to get this sharpened, or at least to make it so it doesn't have that nick there. There are different widths of chisels for different purposes. I use a chisel, so the idea of the chisel is you can just kind of carve with them, but in general you have a line, and then you put them on the line, and you use a mallet, like this mallet, and you hit on the back to shave away the wood. So if you're going across the grain, like through the end grain here, you'd have a line, and you cut down, you have another line that you come to. You could also use a saw for this purpose. Chisels are good because they can get you nice tight corners. So if you're trying to get an internal corner, the chisel will let you get right down into that corner, which is really great for getting nice, sharp, crisp lines. You can sort of carve away when they're really sharp with them. It's a really great feeling and sound as you just carve away at the wood. And you want to make sure they can't take off a ton of wood at a time, so you would just take off a bit. Let's see, you can see how sharp this is. So here, yeah, it's pretty sharp, so this is across the end grain too. Just kind of cut away at the wood. And this is hard wood, obviously. And now on the other side, these are carving tools. So we'll get more of those. But these are relatively small carving tools that you can carve spoons in different shapes with. And most of these with your hand. You can also use with a hammer, but these are pretty small. Or a mallet, excuse me. And it is important to use a rubber mallet, not like a steel hammer, to whack on these, because that could do some damage. But you can carve different shapes with these. And now coming down, we'll start with a tri-square. So a tri-square just makes 90-degree angles. That's all that it does. It doesn't have any angle markings on it. Use this when you want to check if something's perfectly square. So we have this piece of paper, and you want to see if it's square. You can put it up like that, and you can check to see if there's any light between there. If you can hold it up to the light, and there's light on one side or the other, you know it's not quite square. So this, again, is this comes calibrated to a very high degree of precision, so you need to make sure to treat it nicely so that it stays very nice and square. If it gets dropped, it's not square anymore, and now it's pretty much useless. So here we have planes, different kinds of planes, and planes are just chisels that are held at a certain angle, so you can use them like that. So again, if you want to get more in depth, there are manuals here that you can learn all about each one. But on here, there's some important pieces. We can look a little more closely at all the parts on a plane, and they might not all be identical, but in general, they have pretty much the same anatomy in different configurations. This one obviously sits in the palm versus some others where there's a handle to push on, but in terms of the parts, there's similarities. So here you can see the blade sticking out just a little bit, and there's a throat, which is very narrow right now. We can make that bigger and smaller by loosening this and then sliding this left and right. So that'll make it bigger and smaller. So you can look on this side, slide it with one hand, it gets bigger and smaller. Generally, you just want a little bit of space. We'll tighten that back up. And then on the top side, we have this wheel on the back. And so what this is doing is just tightening the whole situation down. So we can loosen that. And now you can see that if you wanted to change the angle of the blade, you could move this side to side. And the goal is just to make it straight. So we'll just get it lined up nice and straight. And then we would tighten it back down, but we're going to keep taking it apart. I'm going to loosen this little bolt right in the middle so that we can take this top cap off. Alright, so this comes off, and this is like a combo chip breaker and top cap. Sometimes it'll be two separate pieces, but now we can see the iron or the blade right here, and on it it'll say what kind of blade it is and the angle that it's ground to. So this comes out when we need to sharpen it. Down here, you can see the mechanism for adjusting the position of the blade forwards and backwards. So you just turn this screw and it moves it forwards and backwards. Down here, there's sometimes a piece called a frog, which it's sort of integrated into the sole of the plane here. The casting has the frog built in, but other planes it's separate. That's just another piece to be aware of. And then the throat plate that slides forwards and backwards. So this just came out. We can pop that back in. So now we can put the iron back in, the blade. So we'll put that down here, and that pin just goes right in that hole. And then the top cap goes back on. It's much easier with two hands than one. So it's there, and we can just retighten this. It doesn't need to be tight, but just enough so it doesn't come off there. And then we're gonna retighten this thumb wheel like that, so it clamps down nice and snug. And we can see the protrusion of the blade here. So right now it's not coming out at all, if you can see that. So we would loosen this and then just tighten this a little bit to nudge the blade down and retighten this up. So that's how we would adjust the position of the blade so it's exposed by just about a hair, just enough. And that's one of the things you'll adjust as you figure out the consistency of the wood and how much blade you need extended to get nice shavings. So there's all these different kinds of planes, and they have some different combinations of pieces to them, but in general that's the design. This one is called, they each have a number, so this is the 9.5 block plane. This is used for end grain often because it has a really shallow angle, which helps to cut across end grain more easily. It's very hard to cut end grain. There are all these other kinds as well. We'll go to this one. So the biggest difference, most obviously, between them is the length. So this is longer, which is good for longer pieces of wood. It helps to smooth it out versus riding over it. It helps to flatten the boards. This is a bench plane, so it kind of means it just lives on the bench. This is a jack plane, so like a jack of all trades. You can do a lot of things with it. And you can see this angle is very, very low on this one. So the blade is at a very shallow angle, which can help it take off wood gently. And then this is the bench plane, has a higher angle. You can see here on this block plane has a very, very low angle. So you can see that angle is very shallow for helping to take off just a little wood. Then this is a shoulder plane. So here the blade actually comes right to the edge, and this lets you get right into the corner of a tenon or some piece of joinery, which is convenient because most planes the iron doesn't get all the way to the edge. This is another specialty plane called a router plane. So you use this when you want to cut a route, into a piece of wood, like a groove or dado or something like that. So you adjust the depth of this little blade and then slide it. It also has a little fence here, so this fence gets attached in the bottom like that, and then it can slide controlling how far into a piece of wood you're cutting. So if you want to, you can just freehand, or the fence will let you set a certain distance, so you're always going a certain distance from the edge. And then down here we have some more tools. This is a draw shave. So this is if you're removing, large pieces of wood, you want to sort of shave away the wood. You just take it into your hand, make sure the wood is well clamped, and draw it along. Then down here, this is actually a burnishing tool. So this is used for sharpening card scrapers, which we'll get to later. And this is another little marking gauge. So we can put that with our other marking knife, sorry. This is another dovetail guide. It actually has a magnet in it, looks like, but you can put this on your wood and line your blade up with it, and the magnet will hold your blade to it, so it keeps at that line. Put this with the other dovetail guide. Here are some more planes. This is a radius plane, so this has there's a curved blade in there for putting corners on pieces of wood. This is a rabbet plane, so it lets you set this edge, this fence, against your piece of wood, and as you cut, it cuts down to a certain depth of that blade. So it makes a rabbet, which is like a notch in the side of your piece of wood. So in here, it would cut that notch out down the length of your piece of wood. Going over here are card scrapers. So card scrapers are pretty much just pieces of metal with a little burr at the edge, just sort of a sharp edge that you scrape with. So it just removes a very, very fine amount of wood. And it's important to learn how to sharpen these. So we might have a video, you can just go on YouTube and search how to sharpen card scrapers using that burnishing tool. And the radius plane actually lives here. And in this side cabinet, we have a flush cut pull saw. So a pull saw cuts when you pull, which is a Japanese style. You can see that it has sort of this floppy blade that doesn't have that stiff back. So if you had, if this had a mortise and tenon or a tenon coming up through it, you could sit it right flush on your piece of wood and cut it flush. It has two different tooth patterns. This is more fine and this is more rough on the other side for cutting wood more quickly. But it cuts when you pull and does nothing when you push. Then we have a spoke shave, a cabinet scraper up here. They're fairly similar in design. The difference is that the spoke shave has a much lower angle, so it removes more wood. So you would pull this along, sort of like the draw shave. This used to be making spokes, like on wagon wheels, for carving the wood. And a cabinet scraper has a much higher angle, so it just kind of scrapes a very thin amount off of your cabinet, kind of like a card scraper. So those are those tools. Then we'll look at holding the wood down on the surface. So here you can see a bunch of holes in the table. And these are for these kinds of accessories to drop into. So, for example, if we have our piece of wood here, we can drop this bench dog, it's called, into a hole. And pull this out, put it right in there, raise this. And then tighten down and it holds our piece of wood. We need to make sure that this dog is below the surface so we don't hit it with anything. And then we can clamp it against there. So now we have this whole top surface exposed. Another way of holding a thing down would be with these. So you can have your piece and like that. And using a mallet, tighten it down, and now it's really firmly on there. So then, as an example, we can use this plane, and we'll have the blade, looks like the blade's set pretty nicely, the throat looks pretty good, maybe a little tight. So here with this hold down, we got it nice and tight, and then to release it, we just hit the back of it, just like that. So those are pretty nifty. Then just to show quickly the plane, so we put this in here, tighten it down, and I'm right-handed, so we're going to move this. Here on the plane, we have just a little bit of blade exposed. That throat is maybe just a little tight. Alright, so a little more throat now. And then we'll see how it's doing. So for this, you want to use your body when possible. It's shaky, so you're going to tighten down here. Okay, and you want to use your body, so you don't just want to use your arms, you're using your whole body. This one will take off my elbow. And it's just making nice shavings. So here, this isn't a great position. You want to, preferably be able to be over the wood. Here, I'm sort of reaching out over the table. But you get the idea. And it goes from being this rough surface to this beautiful, polished, super smooth surface, which is delightful. No sanding. In traditional woodworking, you might not even have sandpaper. You really just need to use your skill to make it super smooth. So here now we just expose this beautiful wood and make these lovely shavings. It's not loud, it's not dusty. And we put it down, just put it on the side. Again, make sure everything is lower than it so you're not accidentally hitting. And those are most of the basics of using, just understanding what the tools are for, and how to make sure you're taking good care of them, taking the dust out and the chips out when you're done before putting it back. You can take some paste wax, just have a paper towel and rub it on there just to keep it from rusting and to make sure it glides nice and smoothly. And then just use the backside just to wipe it off, and so you don't need a lot of extra wax on there. And make sure to put the lid back on. And when you're done, you make sure to put everything back in the cabinet nicely and close it up so it stays nice and clean. Thanks for watching.